Marvel's Spider-Man draws from decades of classic Marvel comic stories, but it also makes some pretty significant changes to the source material, from Mary Jane Watson to Spidey's villains, Miles Morales, and more. Let's spin a web and take a look at the biggest ways the game changed what we know about Spider-Man. The game establishes that even though Spider-Man has been active for about 8 years, he's never battled Dr. Ock or the Green Goblin, even though they're arguably two of his most important foes who he met very early in his career in the comics.
How the hell are you?
Speak of the devil.
Not only that, but the game reveals that both Otto Octavius and Norman Osborn have a long history together as former business partners before Osborn hit it big and Otto became Marvel's version of Walter White. This kind of tracks with the Ultimate Spider-Man comics, which were set in an alternate universe where Otto was Osborn's lab assistant. But even there, they weren't shown to be anywhere near as close as in the game. The game's Peter and Otto also have a long history, with Peter working as Otto's lab assistant. He's basically the only person who believes in Octavius' ability to revolutionize cybernetic prosthetics. But that's not how it plays out in the comics at all. If anything, the game seems to be taking a cue from the movie Spider-Man 2, where Peter and Otto had an almost father-son bond before the Doc was driven mad by failure and loss, of course. In the comics, no one has done more to torment Spider-Man over the years than Norman Osborn, aka the Green Goblin, but in the game, Osborn never becomes the Goblin, and he's portrayed as a far more sympathetic character than usual. He mainly wants to save his son, Harry, from the same genetic disease that claimed his wife. That actually sounds a bit like the Harry from The Amazing Spider-Man 2, who injected himself with Spidey's blood in a desperate attempt to cure himself. One of the game's post-credit sequences reveals that Norman is keeping his son Harry in a stasis tank as he works to cure him. The last thing we see is Harry reaching out and attacking the glass with a tendril. Now, maybe Harry's transformation into Green Goblin is being set up here, but that tendril reminds us more of another iconic Spider-Man villain, Venom. While obviously very different from the original comics version of Venom, this would track with the Ultimate Universe, where the Venom suit was a failed medical device created by the parents of Peter Parker and Eddie Brock. Not sure where Tom Hardy fits in there, but whatever. Mary Jane is usually portrayed as a famous supermodel, but in this game she's an ambitious Daily Bugle reporter, not unlike Superman's Lois Lane. Obviously, this switch allows MJ to take a more proactive role in Peter's adventures, and it's actually another case where the game borrows from the Ultimate Comics. Yep, MJ was also an aspiring journalist there, though in that case she was still a high schooler. Oh, and by the way, in the traditional comics, Peter and MJ don't meet until adulthood. In fact, they didn't get serious until after Gwen Stacy died. Speaking of which, one major Spider-Man character who is conspicuous by her complete absence is Gwen Stacy. In the comics, Gwen was a major love interest for Peter in his college years before being killed in Amazing Spider-Man 121. It's a tragedy that haunts Peter every bit as much as the murder of Uncle Ben, but the game gives no indication if Gwen even exists in this universe. Of course, Gwen has enjoyed a resurgence in recent years thanks to the Spider-Gwen comic, which features a version of Gwen who was bitten by the radioactive spider instead of Peter. So maybe Spider-Gwen will show up in a sequel to the game, or maybe Gwen's just been dead in this universe for years at this point. Speaking of dead loved ones of Peter Parker's, one of the biggest surprises in the game comes when Aunt May succumbs to her devil's breath infection and dies, but not before revealing that she knew Peter was Spider-Man.
You knew?
I've known for a while.
The game actually is drawing heavily from a classic Spider-Man comic. In Amazing Spider-Man 400, a similar scene unfolds. The only difference is it was later revealed that it was all a ruse orchestrated by Norman Osborn. The real May had been replaced by an actress. Yeah, eventually the real May did discover Peter's secret, but even that was reversed following the events of Civil War. The game is notable for introducing a new take on Miles Morales, but Insomniac did change many elements of its comics background. Miles actually made his debut in Marvel's Ultimate line, taking up the mantle of Spider-Man after that world's Peter Parker was killed. But there it was his mother, not his father, who was killed in a supervillain attack. Eventually, Miles and his family permanently crossed over into the regular Marvel universe after the Ultimate Universe was destroyed. Long story. And along the way, his mom was resurrected. Nowadays, Miles fights alongside the adult Peter. Clearly, that was way too much backstory for the game. Anyway, we're just psyched to be able to play as Miles. In the comics, the villain Mr. Negative once worked on a slave ship before assuming the identity of a drowned passenger and vanishing. He was later subjected to genetic experiments by the Marvel version of the Mafia, and that's how he got his powers. But in the game, those experiments were performed by Oscorp, with Norman Osborn basically using him as a guinea pig in his efforts to cure his wife. And where the comics version of Mr. Negative is mostly motivated by a thirst for power, in the game he only craves vengeance. As for the poisonous Devil's Breath, it is one of Mr. Negative's weapons of choice in the comics, but in the game it's an unintentional byproduct of Osborn's research, unlike in the comics where it was always intended to be a deadly bioweapon. Also, Negative has never been a member of the Sinister Six in the comics, but in the game he's a full-fledged part of the team. Hey, welcome to the club, mister! What changes from the comics did you notice in Marvel's Spider-Man? Let's discuss them in the comments, and for more on the game, check out these 18 ways it totally nails New York City, or find out how to unlock the game's secret suit. And for all your Spidey needs, be sure to like and subscribe to IGN.